in some fashion. As part of the trick, it becomes necessary to place things in between the screen and the set to hide the bottom of the screen. I have photoshopped a line differentiating the set and the background Scotchlite front projection screen. Please note how everything is in focus, from the pebbles on the ground in the set to the desert mountains beyond. You will see that hiding the bottom of the Scotchlite screen is always being done when the front screen projection system is being used in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Hiding the screen is one of the fingerprints. It is evidence of its use. Just like the stage magician who needs the long sleeves of his costume to hide the mechanism of his tricks, so too Kubrick needed to hide the mechanism of his trick behind the carefully placed horizon line between set and screen. Here's another example from 2001. And here is the same image with my Photoshop line separating the set. As you will see before this film is finished, this same fingerprint, this same evidence is clearly seen in all of the NASA Apollo stills and video images. It is this fingerprint that reveals not only that NASA faked the Apollo missions, but how they faked them. Let's examine a few NASA Apollo images now. This is a still from Apollo 17. This is also a great example of the front screen projection process. Again, I have photoshopped a line indicating the back of the set. One can see that there is a slight uprising behind the rover, which is hiding the bottom of the screen. Also notice that even though everything is in focus, from the lunar rover to the mountains in the background, there is a strange change in the landscape of the ground right behind my lines. This is because the photo of the mountains being used on the front projection system has a slightly different ground texture than the set. As we go on, we will see that this fingerprint is also consistent throughout the Apollo images. Here's another Apollo image. Now here is my version where I show the line between the set and the screen. Again, notice the texture of the ground changes right behind my line. Now let's go to some more Apollo images. We can see that the same thing occurs here as in the 8-man scenes in 2001. There is always a line separating the set from the screen. Even if you do not see it at first, it will become apparent as one grows more familiar with the front screen projection process and how it is being used to fake the astronauts standing on the lunar surface. Go to any NASA site like www.apolloarchive.com and start looking for yourself. Not all lunar surface shots are using the process. Sometimes the astronauts are just standing on the set with a completely and suspicious black background. The early missions, Apollo 11 and 12, used the front screen projection system only when they had to. But as the missions went on and they had to look better, Kubrick began to perfect the process. Although you can see the front screen projection process on every mission, the seriously revealing images are in the later missions, particularly Apollo 14, 15, 16, and, my favorite, 17. Here are a few from Apollo 17. The astronaut is driving the lunar rover parallel to the screen, and the rover is only 3 or 4 feet away from the Scotchlite. Please note how the tire treads just lead to nowhere. Actually, they are going to the edge of the set. In this one, the astronaut is about 6 feet in front of the Scotchlite screen. Please note how everything is in focus, from the rocks and pebbles close to the camera all the way to the crystal clear mountain behind the astronaut. As we shall see, even that is impossible. Also, please note the other telltale evidence that permeates the Apollo images. There is a stark difference in the ground texture between the set and what is being projected onto the screen. You can almost count the number of small rocks, and the granularity of the ground is clearly seen on the set. But once we get to the screen on the other side of my line, this granularity disappears. This next image is a slick little piece of work. When first viewed, one is sure that they are looking across the vast, unbroken lunar surface from beginning to end. With the Earth rising, it is truly a stunning shot. But sure enough, close examination reveals the set screen line once again. Again, please note the change in the texture of the ground immediately on each side of the line. The little pebbles and dust just seem to disappear behind my line. Former NASA consultant Richard Hoagland has examined many of the photos of the Apollo landings, examining the photographic record of the Apollo missions and processing Apollo images through various graphic programs. Hoagland has discovered geometries in the sky surrounding the astronauts on the moon.
Extraordinary. I mean, mind-blowing extraordinary. This is a close-up. We see the hills. We see just hints that something is not quite right in the sky. And when you scan it and simply turn up the gain, turn up the brightness, there, all over the sky, is a stunning set of geometry. Glass-like, semi-transparent, scattering geometry, scattering blue light, which tells us that it must be fine particles, fine stuff, very micron size, with various imperfections, holes, sparkles, the whole 9 yards. This is what Ken caught them painting out in the LRL, because everyone knows you can't see stars from the moon. The bright things were not stars. They were shining bits of glass scattering sunlight, recorded by these primitive, by today's standards, Hasselblad cameras on 35mm Ektachrome film. Starting with this image, we then did sectionals, and we found that as you zoomed in, you got more and more detail in this supposedly black sky above the moon. Remember, it's a vacuum, no atmosphere. There should be nothing here. It should be pitch black. That, again, is why they were painting it out. This all fits together awfully, awfully well, and I use the term awfully with full knowledge. If you look carefully at this section, you'll see now that there is a stunning three-dimensional girder-like geometry, a scaffolding, rebar, a structural matrix standing above the moon, anchored to the surface by a set of slanted buttresses. The geometry is perfect, meaning it absolutely is consistent with what constructional techniques would be there if you had built something miles high above the current surface of the moon. If you look in close-up, you'll see in the buttresses there are layers of detail. This, again, is, to me, stunning, amazing, stunning quality, because we had not had access to anything approaching this low generation from the Apollo negatives.
He postulates that these geometries are evidence of some kind of gigantic glass-like structures behind, above, and surrounding the astronauts as they stand on the lunar surface. Hoagland even shows us that there are rainbow lights reflecting in the sky high above the astronauts. Many people, especially in NASA, have attacked Hoagland for these interpretations. Yet no matter how much they attack Hoagland, they can never explain what it is that he's finding on these Apollo images. I, like Hoagland, believe that NASA has actually gone to the moon. I believe that moon rocks were taken from the surface of the moon. I believe that there is strong evidence of some kind of past intelligent activity on the surface of the moon. But I do not believe that standard rocket technology is what got mankind from the Earth to the surface of the moon. I'm not trying to debunk Hoagland's discoveries. All I'm trying to do with the following evidence is to show that the Apollo landings were a hoax, and that Stanley Kubrick, using the front screen projection system, directed them. Again, I want to make sure that I'm understood here. I'm not saying that there are not strange structures on the moon. What I'm saying is that the structures and geometries that Richard Hoagland is seeing in the photographs taken on the lunar surface are not what he thinks they are. He believes that these images are proof that NASA is hiding evidence of alien cities. This is a processed photograph of astronaut Ed Mitchell on the surface of the moon, taken during the Apollo 14 mission. Of course, all the stuff in the sky, as seen in this processed Apollo image from Hoagland, is impossible if it was taken on the lunar surface. There is no atmosphere on the moon. Therefore, there can be nothing in the sky. Yet when Hoagland processed much of the Apollo lunar surface imagery, He discovered over and over again all of this crud in the sky above the astronauts. No one in NASA even attempts to answer Hoagland or anyone else about the strange stuff that he and others is finding in the skies above the astronauts. Richard Hoagland theorizes that this is photographic evidence of huge abandoned glass cities on the surface of the moon. He says that what we are seeing in these processed images is huge glass towers that only show up on the images after they've been processed through the graphics software. Hoagland has taken an image on the left and processed it in a manner very similar to how I processed the images from 2001: A Space Odyssey. By increasing the gamma and the contrast of the image, he arrived at the picture on the right. Hoagland interprets the image on the right as proof of giant glass structures behind the astronaut, and for that matter, all over the surface of the moon. What Hoagland is really seeing, though, is the imperfections of the background Scotch-Light screen that Kubrick used to create the lunar backgrounds. These imperfections can also be found in the desert backgrounds in the ape scenes in 2001, as I've shown.
Looking north in the Taurus Littrow, here's supposedly a mountain, here's a bigger mountain. Look at the sky up above, and in the sky you will see this inset, and in the inset there is this incredible rainbow.
What Hoagland and the above image reveals is the texture and geometry of the Scotch-Light screen. Because of the vastness of the set, because he needed it to look like it was not done on a soundstage, Kubrick had to sew several Scotch-Light screens together. It was only when he had created a large enough Scotch-Light screen was he then able to get a large enough background image that would look expansive enough to appear to be the surface of the moon or a desert 4 million years ago. The same process that created the desert backgrounds in 2001 is the same process that created the lunar mountain background for the Apollo missions. This is a picture from Hoagland's research. This processed image reveals a rainbow-like reflecting light high in the sky above the astronauts on the moon. Hoagland theorizes that this is light reflecting off one of the giant glass towers standing right behind the astronaut. What this really is a light reflecting off one of the tiny glass beads of the Scotch-Light screen. For some reason, that particular glass bead was slightly off from its 90-degree angle, and so it caught the projector light and reflected it back into the camera. Again, a scene from 2001. And now one of Hoagland's processed Apollo shots. It is pretty clear that Hoagland's geometries are really the patterns and flaws of the stitches in the Scotch-Light screen.
Furthermore, if you look in the background, here's another one of these amazing glass prismatic dispersions captured behind Schmidt. And the overview is this. Here's the wide angle. There's this incredible color, which cannot exist. It is identical in principle to this. This is a shot of the Golden Gate looking toward the east with the sun setting in the west, ergo the name Golden Gate. This is atmosphere scattering red, green, blue. It's basically the atmosphere acting like a movie screen.
But there's more. One of the many things that many researchers have discovered about the Apollo footage is that if you slightly speed up the footage of the astronauts walking around on the lunar surface, they appear to be doing their business in normal speed, like they are on Earth. It is apparent that the footage has been shot in slow motion to give the effect of a low-gravity situation. It seems odd that one would move slower in a low-gravity environment because the low gravity would cause even less resistance, not more. In the scenes in 2001, near the beginning, we see the people on the ship and on the lunar surface also moving in a slightly slow-motion manner. Again, this doesn't make a lot of sense in a real-life situation. If anything, they should be moving faster than on Earth because there's less gravity. But showing astronauts moving normally really causes the action to look unreal and staged. So Kubrick decided to shoot the moon scenes both in 2001 and in the Apollo landings in slow motion to make it more convincing. In a way, we were being set up by the film 2001 to accept the odd slow motion in the Apollo scenes. This may have been one of the reasons to release 2001 a year before the Apollo 11 landing. By creating a slow motion environment in 2001, the audience would then accept the slow motion environment being portrayed in the Apollo footage. There is one thing that I'm sure of. Some part of Stanley Kubrick wanted everyone to know what he had done, and that is why he left behind clues that would explain who did it and how. But also we can see that Kubrick used the faking of the Apollo moon missions as an opportunity to make one great film. Because he had negotiated a deal where no one would be given oversight on the film, Kubrick was allowed to make whatever movie he desired. Knowing that no one would object to his anti-Hollywood methods, he created the first abstract feature film, the first intellectual movie, and the greatest work of art in the 20th century. And I'm talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey.